So today we have Margot Bloomstein, who's going to be talking to us about writing and designing for trust. Margot is a content strategist and author. And Margot, thank you very much for coming today.
Well, thank you all so much for joining me. I'm just going to move myself there a little bit lower on the screen. Hello. As you heard, and as you probably saw in the tweets leading up to this and all, I think it's important for us to talk about what it means to foster trust through content. And I believe that because kind of looking around at the world, the greater zeitgeist, we have a lot of problems right now around trust. And I think with good reason. And I think that there's a lot that we can do, we here in the community of content strategists and content designers and technical writers and editors, as well as our peers in design and marketing, but especially us. I think there is a lot that we can do to help renew the public's sense of trust, help empower them to act with greater confidence. So I'm not talking about just sort of an unquestioning sense of trust, but rather an empowered way to counter cynicism, to better inform their thinking, to make more well-informed decisions, whether it's in their lives as consumers or as citizens, as readers or voters or shoppers. However we all exist in the world, I think it helps us a lot when we're able to move through the world with greater confidence that is built on a strong foundation of good, high quality information that we can assess and evaluate to determine if it is good and high quality. And that, of course, all comes back to content. So I think before I talk about confidence, I want to talk about vulnerability. So vulnerability is what we're talking about when we talk about things like transparency, or when we talk about empathy, or about building trust with other people, whether that's team members, maybe the folks in marketing, or the folks in legal, or the folks in product management, or with our clients or customers. I want to talk about how we can operationalize vulnerability, what it means to unpack that and weave the goals of vulnerability as a strength into all of our work. Because I am here and you are here because we right now have a problem around that, because we have a lot of problems around trust in our society. Most of us don't trust what we hear. And over the past decade, people have grown more cynical. In a lot of industries, marketing now falls flat. Sales cycles are taking longer. Maybe even collaboration is more challenging. We've also seen how most messages don't really seem to motivate action, and people look at a lot of messaging that comes especially out of government with a high degree of cynicism. And that isn't just because of the pandemic. These problems precede the pandemic. People just don't trust brands on face value the way they used to. But I don't think we can blame them either, because we've all endured failures of leadership and maybe outright deception and inconsistent messaging from government and brands that we thought we once knew. And when people don't know who to trust and then decide not to believe anything, that's the problem with growing cynical. Because today, in an age of fake news and maybe even like hidden agendas, cynicism can oftentimes seem safe. We all kind of turn away from experts, take refuge in our filter bubbles, and eventually maybe turn inward too. And that's a bit of a problem, because that's where we see when people start to distrust even their own gut instincts, when people lose confidence in their ability to even make good decisions. But that's where we can help. That's where you can help. So to regain your audience, to regain their trust, we need to rebuild their confidence and empower them to make good decisions. So affirm their hope, their interest in learning, their enthusiasm for becoming more knowledgeable. That all takes vulnerability. There are a few other factors at play there too. And this is not a new problem. As I said, this goes back before the pandemic. This goes back way, way before even that. So I want to go back pre-internet, pre-industrial revolution, back actually to commerce in pre-Renaissance Europe. It's totally relevant for our problems today, because the stuff that we struggle with around trust and communication, people in the 1500s struggled with that too. It's a very relatable kind of time period, because then the need for information, for trustworthy information, it was changing. Previously, people who sold goods, maybe it was candles or cloth or salt, they would haul their wares from town to town in a region, maybe to different markets and fairs. But in the Renaissance, trading families and empires actually began to grow and flourish as they realized that they could reap greater profits, not by going town to town, but rather by staying put and instead engaging in arbitrage among multiple cities and countries. Now, the catch for that is that trade merchants, in order to be successful, they needed information that they could trust about the different cities in which they wanted to do business. So that's not unlike how many customers need information that they can trust about the processes that you're explaining, the products that they're considering buying, how to repair and engage with those different products. These are common problems that people still struggle with. So that brings us to this guy. I think you can see kind of the scraps of paper up there on the wall behind him. They're kind of early Post-it notes. Clearly, this is somebody that knows a lot about information architecture. He's not an IEA. Those are actually letters. They're not early Post-it notes. They're actually letters that he has pinned up there. This is George Guise, and he was a Renaissance era trading merchant. He represents this emerging merchant class who ran export and import businesses across all of Europe. That kind of work took a degree of specialized knowledge that informed his choices in the different cities in which he wanted to operate. So to make good decisions, he relied on people who lived in foreign cities to write him periodic updates about economic conditions, palace intrigue, that type of thing. Those letter writers, those correspondents, those foreign correspondents, they were really the first journalists. And what they would offer is kind of, it's unique, but very applicable to our work today. So they would empower merchants with consistent details, a unique and individual perspective, as well as openness, vulnerability to learning and listening and maybe correcting their initial perceptions, that sort of thing. They were always growing, so they kept themselves open to new information. So in that capacity, they were offering really authority to the people that they were supporting. So what he was offering, or what he was gaining from those correspondents, was authority and consistency. And that's something that we still value because it empowers us too, to make better choices about what we buy, where we eat, where we shop, how we vote, all of those things that kind of go into modern life and maybe went into life in the 1500s as well. So they established authority by sharing a unique perspective with the depth of context and by sharing how their knowledge was constantly growing. You can think of that as a unique voice, the right volume of detail, and a degree of strength that comes through vulnerability. Now, authority comes from being willing to go where your audience cannot, either because of danger or cost or the depth of expertise it requires. So in the US, when Anderson Cooper talks to us from a war-torn region or where there's recently been a disaster, we stop and listen. Or when David Chang, the owner and the chef of the Momofuku chain, now a star of a number of shows on Netflix, when he takes us to explore something like Asian, Cajun, fusion food, again, we stop and we listen. Or when Ophevia Kist-Arcton comes to us live from Dakar, when she sat down with Anthony Bourdain to talk about Senegalese food, we listened to both of them because we trust their respective authority. In each of these cases, we trust their respective authority, their unique viewpoints, and the depth of knowledge that they offer to empower us with information that we can't otherwise get, again, because of maybe the expense or the depth of expertise it requires, or being willing to go into dangerous areas. We trust their vulnerability too, that they're willing to learn, to engage in new experiences on our behalf, and maybe correct their own misconceptions and bring us along on that journey as well. So that brings us to that idea of authority. It empowers us, it educates us, it respects us, because they're not speaking down, they're not gaslighting their readers or listeners, nor do they demand absolute loyalty. And we reward that in the form of trust. What they do might seem like it is far away and distant and kind of very distinct from our world as writers, as content creators. But marketing is a form of authority. Technical writing is a form of authority. If you sit down the hall from the product team and you've got that inside scoop that people wouldn't otherwise have, you have that authority. I've been reading a lot from Jay Rosen, the press critic, on authority. And I think that we can bring his thinking into our own work, because when people or institutions or brands have authority, again, we reward it with trust. We like seeing our interests or our values or our curiosity reflected in their focus and in their facts. But the opposite is also true. When they are inconsistent or irrelevant, that inconsistency and irrelevance erodes their authority, and it stokes our cynicism. It undermines their authenticity when maybe a brand breaks from what we know and what we trust in their voice or subject matter. And it can be hard to reconcile that with our beliefs about the organization. Those are problems that we can counter through content that is more relevant to its context, to people's needs, to the time and place, and is consistent with their expectations of us. And those types of issues add up, because today, across all industries, people are suffering a crisis of trust. We have problems today in believing outside perspectives and marketing. And maybe you see it too in your life as a consumer, as a citizen, just as a reader of the news. We used to place trust in familiar brands and established media. Maybe they were organizations that we grew up with. They reflected our reality. But we don't trust those same institutions anymore. And we also don't award trust in the same way. Because like us, our users look at the world with more skepticism than trust. And we can blame inconsistency in the media or inconsistency in politicians. It used to be that if you caught a politician flip-flopping, that it would scuttle their campaign. That doesn't really happen too much anymore. Because when the institutions that we used to trust tell us not to trust the evidence of our own eyes, we have more vocabulary around that now. We call that gaslighting. And it affects our very ability to trust both other brands and ourselves, our own perceptions. And think about that for a moment. If you're in marketing or a role adjacent to marketing, and you're trying to tell your audience maybe about the features or maybe even the benefits of the new product that is rolling out, or maybe a new service that is available from your platform. And if their first response is to say, yeah, right, I don't believe that for a second, it's like the conversation ends before it can even begin. That happens a lot for product management, marketing. It also is happening a lot across the news cycle. We've seen what that looks like here. In the US, 63% of the population has difficulty differentiating between real and fake news. And we've seen how that undermines elections on both sides of the Atlantic. And today, that kind of insidious cynicism undermines all institutions: journalism, government services, public health, every sector of our economy. And if you support product management, maybe customer support, help content, or any area of professional communication or technical writing, you know that this kind of creeping cynicism, it's a problem that undermines your work too. But I think that you are well positioned to address and resolve that problem. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what it looks like to resolve that issue. Because I think this is the secret. This is really the problem statement for the future of our work. To regain trust, we must empower our audiences. And you already have the tools to do that. So whether your users are consumers or other businesses or citizens or donors or voters, to regain their trust, we need to empower them by educating them and rebuilding their confidence in themselves and their ability to evaluate information. That's how we regain their trust in our organizations and rebuild their trust in their ability to interact with our organizations. So that gets us back to this idea of authority, because the content we offer is a form of authority. It's saying, I'm here, you're not, let me tell you about it. And brands that can teach us about their product category, that comes from a position of authority. Product descriptions, they speak from a position of authority. Brands that can put a stake in the ground around their values, maybe prototype in public, engage in that sort of participatory design to bring their audiences closer, or demonstrate accountability when they mess up. That is a form of authority. And that's authority that takes vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as a strength. So yes, we're in a really difficult place right now. The erosion of trust is affecting any industry that sells products or offers services or attempts to inform or persuade. But there's hope, and it starts by empowering our audiences. Because I think if people are looking inward for answers, we can obviously meet them there. So what does that look like? To regain your audience's trust, you need to empower them with useful, usable information. That has three components: voice, volume, and vulnerability. We're going to talk about each one in turn with some examples that I think really illustrate those points in that framework. And those are those same tools, again, that our Renaissance era letter writers used so well. We think that our profession has evolved so much, but really some of those old tools still make a lot of sense. So let's start by talking about voice. This is something that probably many of us know well through our work in content development. It refers to the distinct personality that manifests both visually and verbally in everything your brand does. So do you project a sense of tradition or innovation? Are you an arm of government that in all of your messaging is portraying maybe that you're very reliable, tried and true, trusted? Or are you more witty or more scrappy and creative and presenting innovation in that way? Voice is something that tells your audience how you are, who you are, how you are, and if you're someone that they can trust, and if they can trust what they know about you. So this is kind of getting into their instincts as well. But when a brand looks one way and sounds another, or maybe changes over time to pursue new offerings and is constantly changing its voice, maybe because there are many different writers and no style guide to rule them all on the team, that's when it runs a risk of alienating its original audience. It's by using a consistent voice to expose changes in plain language that users are able to maintain their confidence, not just in the brand, but also in their own knowledge of where it's going. So we can sort of support that subconscious internal check-in that people like to have of saying, do I know this organization? Oh yeah, I can still trust them. So I can trust my own faith in them as well. It's a little bit recursive, but I think that's what we need to play into as well. So MailChimp, the email marketing platform, they've had to really get comfortable with this idea and then operationalize it through their style guidelines, through their design system. They've helped their voice evolve over time to ensure that kind of consistency. So they started out as a small business, serving other small businesses. And growth is not without its challenges, and sometimes even culture needs guidelines to scale. So early on, Freddie, the MailChimp mascot, that monkey up in the corner there, he would serve up copy and appear throughout the platform. And sometimes people would even hear error messages in the voice of Freddie. It was a little disconcerting, I think, if you weren't expecting to hear help content from a monkey. But over time, they have matured. They're no longer a small business. Now they handle more than 60% of the world's email marketing. And they've added services too, like e-commerce, and they never want to alienate their existing customers as they're doing that. So they've worked to maintain certain aspects of the brand. They still use the same Cavendish yellow through everything. Copy remains in the first person, but now the tone is more robust. They vary it depending on the expertise of the audience to which they're speaking. So branding is still using, again, the same kind of look, but the illustration style has become more nuanced in their kind of playbook. They vary it, again, depending on the audience, depending on the context. And people know that they can trust MailChimp in part because that voice is familiar and consistent. So it's not monolithic, but it's maturing. And you can probably think about how your style guidelines can support that kind of effort as well. This is what a little slice of theirs looks like. So as I said, they vary and tweak messages depending on the audience as far as how much detail they need to support them, how many examples they can go into. And this isn't about introducing big changes, but rather allowing for evolution and tailoring to fit the needs of their audience, as well as the needs of different designers and content creators. That's something that you're also probably familiar with a little bit closer to home there, in terms of how the British National Health Service applies that thinking so beautifully when they're engaging with content creators or when they're trying to convey content from a fairly specialized, experienced, wise audience that needs to convey messaging to lay people. They're constantly working to streamline copy, to translate it to plain language. So they use words like pee and poo right up front on their site. And they're always working to clean up nominalizations. In the back end of their content authoring tools, they're also reminding content creators of that, both in their content authoring tools and in their style guidelines. They're constantly prompting people to unpack content into plain language. In the service manual, it says, do the hard work to make things simpler, because healthcare journeys on their own can be complex and laden with stress. Content should not be one of the things that is also stressful. It's our jobs to make life easier, clearer, maybe not simplistic, but simpler to navigate for our audiences. So do the hard work. That means helping their writers author content better. So the NHS offers editorial guidance and guardrails to prompt for meta descriptions, alt tags, and also, as I said, encouraging constant translation to more plain language. The look and feel that they offer mirrors the blunt language they use, at times even breaking more formal style rules. But here you can see how they implement a blunt, precise visual language with red callouts for immediate high priority alerts, yellow on the bottom for gentler advisories. And then also kind of in a nod to consistency there, the site also uses Frutiger. That's the typeface that's been used by the NHS for more than 2 decades. So people can rely on that level of consistency, knowing that they know the organization, at least in the content that they see and how that content is presented. So if your brand's voice addresses how you communicate, volume refers to how much you communicate in both length and level of detail, both visually and verbally. So how do you know how much to say on a topic? How many images do you need to include in maybe in a photo gallery to describe a product? We know that brevity and bullets have ceded space to long form content, even on e-commerce sites. So how do you determine how much content is enough? I feel like that's the age-old question of our industry, like how much is enough and how frequently does our organization need to tweet or blog or engage on TikTok or whatever? Well, we know that the answer can come through in user research. You know you've offered enough detail when your audience can make good decisions and feel good about the decisions that they make. And that's something that you can measure in customer feedback, the rate of product returns on the site, and a number of other variables that kind of look beyond just how good is the content. One of my favorite examples of this comes from the electronics retailer Crutchfield. So they are known for having long pages and lots of different content types. You can see there's one page there that, there's my hand, woo, hi. There's one page, nope, I gotta point this way, up there that I expanded out so you can see it full length. When you zoom all the way out on it, you can tell this is a page that people have to scroll down a whole lot if they really want to take in all that information, in this case about how to choose a new camera lens. But scrolling down a whole lot, reading those long pages, that is exactly what they see people do on the site when they're getting comfortable with the idea of a new purchase. In this case, if they're trying to evaluate camera lenses or maybe some different type of audio equipment or something else kind of technical to implement in their home or home computing system or in their car. In this case, they're able to see lots of different content types, comparing different types of pictures that you can take with this lens, how you can zoom in, what the focal lengths look like, what using that lens looks like and feels like, what the weight is like. They're able to get a lot of information to get comfortable with a purchase before they even think about putting a product in the shopping cart. And this plays out really, really well for them because they're not just getting comfortable, they're getting confident too. And in a world where media and politicians gaslight us into thinking that we shouldn't trust ourselves, smart brands can help us regain confidence in ourselves, in our ability to make good decisions, and in them, and really in the strength of our society. And I want to hold on that a second because I want you to tweet the heck out of it and sing it from the rooftops, because this is what organizations in both the public and private sector owe their users. We owe them confidence and empowerment and trust. And we know there that both kind of writ large and in this example from Crutchfield, that education drives empowerment, empowerment drives confidence, and confidence drives trust. And you can call that customer loyalty if that's how you need to sell it internally. But this is also about what we can do in the content that we create to create more confident people that are grounding their confidence in good information and taking that into all other areas of their lives. This is about how we can create really a stronger society. One of my other favorite examples of this, of using a lot of content to build confidence, comes from America's Test Kitchen. They're a publishing organization that focuses on the needs of home chefs, and they earn attention and love and so much loyalty because the Test Kitchen empowers its audiences by meeting them right where they are. It means offering the right level of detail, the right amount of content for the user's mindset and channel and device. So ATK, America's Test Kitchen, they publish, dozens of cookbooks every year. There's a Cook's Illustrated magazine, Cook's Country magazine. They've got a Twitter feed, an Instagram feed. They produce a TV show. There are cooking school shows. They offer reworked recipes. And they meet their audiences where they need to be to start out, and then they help them move along. That means novice chefs can find just basic definitions. More savvy chefs can find advanced cooking techniques, and it's always optimized with content types that are right for the specific reading and use cases. So that means if you're standing in your kitchen, you're like, oh, yikes, I have to make dinner tonight. I don't even know what I'm making. You're already scrolling through your phone anyhow, because you weren't even thinking about making dinner. You can find swipeable recipes that are full of immediately actionable photos where the steps are just right in the captions for those photos. Whereas if you're taking the time, maybe you just got the new issue of Cook's Illustrated and you want to sit down with the magazine, have a nice restful reading experience, there you can find paragraph after paragraph of wisdom, mulling over variables and analyzing different cooking techniques. They offer lots of related articles, maybe about the history of different spices, how they're sourced, all of those types of things. But that's not right for everybody. So they're trying to create content that meets the needs of the individual where they are, sort of in their cooking journey, in their level of expertise. That affects also how they create content, even in the overall writing style. So they invest in the appropriate level of detail to help home cooks engage all of their senses in really immersive education, to learn to trust their senses. As Jack Bishop, their chief creative officer, shared with me, he said, we never say bake for 30 minutes, but rather bake until it looks like this, feels like this, that when you pull a loaf of bread out, whack the bottom of it, it should sound like this. And that's about 30 minutes. So they're empowering people with education to make them more confident. This isn't about hearing from one famous chef. It's not about ego, but rather about the science that drives their publishing. So they're selling empowerment, not some kind of cult of personality. As he said, it's success that breeds confidence. When we help our users do well, maybe choose the right product or fix the product that they already have, maybe it makes them feel proud or smart or accomplished. They're becoming both more confident in themselves and in us, in the brand that helped to get them there. So we know that confident decisions take a certain amount of content. It's not always more content. And I think that this is a lesson that that you hear a lot there in the example from gov.uk when they worked on improving information coming from the government. It used to be that citizens could get government service information from some 9 different sites plus the Guardian, and oftentimes people were just turning to the Guardian to get kind of the official direction on things. When they went through that process of paring down their content to just what is essential, to say, well, what are the things on which only government can offer this information? They were able to cut from 75,000 pages down to 3,000 pages. And when they tested it with users to find out, well, does this ring true? Does this actually help you? They got to that point where their users were able to make good decisions and feel good, maybe even surprised at the swiftness of it, but feel good about the decisions that they were making. I think that's an example that we can see a lot coming from government, see the benefits from government, but this is also something that affects even big consumer organizations and even offline as well. Print publications oftentimes drive the need to be concise and focused because they're working with a limited page count. They have to walk a balance between offering enough content, but not too much to blow out that page count. I worked with Lindt & Sprungly USA, the chocolate manufacturer, on the challenge of building internal trust. So they had conducted an internal survey, an employee survey that revealed that many people at the time didn't feel like they knew their own company. And HR already realized this because they were seeing how that was affecting employee turnover. People just didn't feel tied to the organization anymore because they didn't always see like what they were doing, maybe in the pack room or in marketing or recipe development, how that was affecting what the company was doing that quarter or the next quarter. So they didn't always understand how their work fit into the company's success. And that led to issues of detachment and employee turnover. They brought me in to say, well, what can we do to improve people's knowledge of the company? Maybe we need a new employee newsletter. We worked together to launch a new internal publication that came out a few times a year. It was just one signature, 16 pages, and it focused on clarifying all aspects of retail chocolate production, marketing, merchandising, from sourcing and supply chains to design and packaging, and getting the product out the door to retailers. Now their volume, or the amount of content we were sharing, meant detailed images, not just reusing the same sort of stock photography, but using more detailed images that always included human elements like hands holding the product, keeping them in scale, showing how people were engaged, not just the product on shelf in stores, but as you saw in that last image, seeing like the smiling faces behind those products that were bringing the chocolate out to retail and out to the floor. So we were always including human elements in the imagery. And then in the copy itself, we were always unpacking technical terminology, not to dumb it down, but to help people smarten up. So every time we used a term from the marketing department or merchandising or chocolate production or the supply chain, even explaining what is a supply chain, that was something that we needed to unpack so that people could feel like that vocabulary, that jargon, that could be their vocabulary too. Content can be very empowering when we use it to teach people. So Lindt's corporate leadership, they had to be vulnerable for that to work. They had to decide how much they wanted to share, how much they wanted to invest in sharing, but they saw the benefits of it. In that case, the content paid for itself in reducing employee turnover because it's far more expensive to recruit and hire rather than to just keep an existing employee. And all of that work comes together through vulnerability. So individually, a consistent voice and appropriate volume, those are characteristics of good brand-driven content strategy and design. It's through vulnerability that the efforts in voice and volume can unite to really foster trust. So let's take a look at what that means, because vulnerability, this idea that we toss around a lot, this term that's kind of fluffy that we toss around a lot, it's risky. It is the risk that we take on for connection. It's also the cost of transparency. Vulnerability is also the cost of authenticity. And we fling around those terms. Many a marketer has flung around those terms, but they do have real meaning if our clients are brave enough to embrace them. So will your organization maybe risk criticism or ridicule or rabid customers if it means that you can find greater loyalty from maybe even more customers? And again, let's not mistake vulnerability for weakness, because the smartest brands have learned that they can grow stronger and gain trust by owning their mistakes, by prototyping in public, and by acting on their values. Now, that can mean putting a stake in the ground around those values. And that's what the retailer Penzies did. So Penzies is a spice retailer based in the Midwest here in the US, and they have stores kind of all around the country. And when you're a company and you put yourself out there, that's how you find your community. So in the wake of our 2016 election, presidential election, Bill Penzie, the owner of the beloved Penzies Spices chain, he took to Facebook to make clear the company's positions on immigration and racism, because he felt that the presidential candidate that was stoking hatred for immigrants did not reflect his company's values. He said that runs counter to our company's purpose, which is to bring people together around cooking as an act of love. And for anybody that might have said, hey, Spice Boy, stay in your lane, he doubled down on authenticity. He said, this is our lane. Cooking is political. So many of our family favorites represent the story of human immigration, and they're flavored with spices that we source from all around the world. So this very much is our lane. And that's risky. That's vulnerable. His position drew a lot of headlines and criticism, and the company did lose some customers. But then they saw their sales spike to record levels. That occurred every time that he would take to Facebook and share a political message. And over the past few years, Penzies has enjoyed a 50% increase in online sales, because as more and more people would share his posts, they grew to know the brand, they grew to trust the brand, and they saw themselves maybe as part of the movement and supported the company then by buying from them more. They were actually able to expand their audience, because instead of just selling to home cooks and chefs and those people that subscribe to Cooks Illustrated and love America's Test Kitchen, now they were also getting quite a political following that said, I may not be much of a cook, but I have friends that are, and they need birthday presents and Christmas presents, and let me buy them spices. And in contrast, when we compare Penzies to their closest competitor in the same market, it's the Spice House. They, I know, real creative naming in this industry. They offered a discount code of no politics. It was all caps, no politics. They started running it shortly after Bill Penzie went to Facebook with his first big political statement. So they said, business should stay out of politics. That very, very common traditional viewpoint. But we know that staying out of politics is a stance that reflects privilege, not shared by people who may be affected by discriminatory policy. In fact, we've seen how when businesses do engage in politics, when they make their viewpoints known, increasingly that resonates with their audiences. It's a way to engage with the issues that their audiences care about most. The most recent Edelman Trust survey, I think it was something like 85% of people, don't quote me on that, but upwards of 80% of people said they do want to know the politics that are influencing the brands that they support. So here we can see that vulnerability, like voice, it's an act that tells people who you are. It empowers them with information so that they can make more informed decisions about doing business with you. And frequently, the rewards are far greater than the risks. But yes, it is risky for a brand to put a stake in the ground. It takes even more vulnerability to acknowledge deficiencies or ask for help. Maybe if your company has screwed up, or employees and critics and customers are demanding explanations and accountability. Maybe this sounds kind of familiar. Your organization is at its most vulnerable when it's staggering away from mistakes. Maybe it's been wounded by errors of judgment or reeling from jaw-dropping calamities because the CEO did something incredibly stupid and incredibly public. Well, what comes next is what matters most. Do you double down on defeat, or do you embrace an opportunity to earn trust? That's what happened at Zoom. I love talking about Zoom on Zoom because it always feels a little risky. Over the past 2 years, Zoom has given us a masterclass in vulnerability. So December 2019, they had about 10 million daily meeting participants. Most of them were business customers, most had IT departments, most of which had security protocols. By March 2020, so 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago now, as the virus was reaching pandemic proportions, those 10 million daily meeting participants, they jumped to more than 200 million daily users because businesses responded to COVID-19 by mandating people work from home and schools embraced remote learning. Some 90,000 schools across 20 different countries jumped on the platform within those first few months. And everybody was having birthday celebrations and virtual happy hours, and preschool teachers were meeting with their classes over Zoom, and book clubs are meeting over Zoom. It was a great time to be online if you loved to be on Zoom. And more people than ever before wanted the platform to perform like it had not been designed, and often without the guidance of an ID department. Guidance like, hey, set a password to ensure only the people you invite can attend, or hey, enable a waiting room to screen your attendees. We know what happened next. Enter the Zoom bombers. Now, the CEO, Eric Yuan, he could have called out those issues. He could have blamed them, but he didn't. Instead, in early April, he wrote a blog post that is a model in building trust through vulnerability. So he spoke in a humble but confident voice, with a volume of detail that respected his users, and with vulnerability to bring those users into the process of how to help hold Zoom accountable for improving. So he started out by apologizing, like you can see there, in the first person. How often does that happen, to say, I am deeply sorry. I want to share what we will do about it. So he explained what happened. He offered detail that demonstrated respect for the audience's intelligence and pivoted to make a "you're using it wrong" kind of problem into opportunity. And that's not spin, that's smart. So he said, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to move forward. And he credited the community in that process. So he said dedicated journalists and security researchers have helped identify pre-existing problems, i.e., we should have known about these things. We appreciate that scrutiny. And then he offered a plan to hold him accountable for a resolution. He said, first, we're going to enact a feature freeze to shift all of our engineering resources to focus on trust and safety and privacy issues. And by the following week, Zoom had made virtual waiting rooms and meeting passwords the default for all new meetings. Then he detailed how he'd conduct weekly webinars, publish a transparency report, submit to third-party audits, and what all of that meant. That's where the technical writers were coming in too, to explain this to their audience. So he was figuring out how to draw the community into the solution in a response that was swift, it was specific, it was transparent, making it a powerful case study in earning trust, even while confronting trouble. So voice and volume and vulnerability, they can add up to empower people to renew their confidence and rebuild trust. And as we stumble back from several years of gaslighting and cynicism, as we are continuing to face questionable behavior in the halls of government, that's what people need now more than anything. That's what our society needs. We need to renew their confidence, their ability to feel like they can navigate information and make good decisions. Because as we've lost trust in institutions, smart organizations can step into that void. And I think regardless of your industry, your brand can be a leader in moving our society forward. Because yes, it is easy to be cynical, and we have so many reasons to be cynical. But cynics look at the world as it is and say, it's worse. I think people in professional communications, marketing, writers, we look at the world as it is and say, it can be better. So let's work on clarifying the information in it. Let's work on making it better. If you are hopeful that it can be better, let's work so that it will be. Because despite all of our reasons to be cynical, people still act with hope. Your customers do. They continue scrolling. We all think that we can become smarter or better or kinder if we just read a few more things on Twitter. And right now is the time to affirm that hope. So let's design our way out of cynicism and toward trust. That is something that you can do for yourself, for your organization, for your users, and for our society. So let's get to it. And thank you very much. I think we have time now for questions and thoughts. And yeah, let's jump to that. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Margot. Whilst everyone collects their thoughts, I would like to just do a little bit of an info dump about some of the ISTC stuff that's going on. And that's just to let everybody know the latest issue of the podcast that is up on the web address you can see there, istctechcom.podbean.com. This features Ray Gallen, who is somebody who has spoken at the ISTC conference, TCUK. It's a half an hour long, and it's always well worth checking out. So fully recommend going and doing that. And next month, the date and time, it's back to our more usual 1 p.m. slot. We're going to be chatting with Jonathan Lundin about why users cannot understand your content. And the description of his talk and himself was far too long to fit on my slide. So I recommend you go and look at our website, istc.org.uk/events, to find out all the details there. And there's links through to the Eventbrite page where you can sign up for everything.